Hey, Warren here. Welcome back to Black Z Garage. Today I'm going to be adding a fluid cooler to the hydroboost system as part of my preparation for the Summit Autocross week coming up in July. So in the first two Autocross weeks I had an issue with either power steering or the brakes. So I'm hoping that adding a fluid cooler is going to help a little bit. I mean, the engine runs decent temperature and everything, but by the mid-afternoon everything else is so hot under here. It's like heat soaked. I mean, black car, matte black hood, me and Wendy both racing on asphalt all day. So I think part of the issue was some of the fluid just expands too much and fills up the system and it kind of locks up. So I want to try and alleviate that if I can. So I'm going to add this Derale fluid cooler in front of the radiator, and hopefully that and doing a couple other things I can keep the heat down in here. The louvers did help some. It was better last year than it was the first year, but still everything gets so hot, so I really hope that throwing this fluid cooler on will help. After it goes through the cooler, I'm going to add this filter from Classic Performance Products so it filters it out a little bit right before it goes back to the pump. I'm going to get this project started by taking out the top section of my grill. There's a couple screws on each side and one in the middle. I'll pull that out, and then I'll also take off the top radiator support. That way I can lean the radiator back and get in there. It has 3 screws. I'll pop them out and lean it back. With the grill out, I'll be able to find a good spot to put the new cooler, and it'll give me a little extra room to get my hands in there. I like where I have the cooler position, so I'm going to go ahead and mark the holes with a Sharpie and a center punch and drill them and get this mounted in here. I drilled through the radiator core support, which is sheet metal, so I'm going to use some sheet metal screws and bolt down the fluid cooler, and then we can hook up the lines. Usually the most aggravating part of getting these hoses together is getting this collar on once you've made your cut. A couple things to make it easier. Before you make the cut, wrap this tape as tight as you can around there before you cut. And then once you do, use a pair of dikes and trim off any tiny little hairs that are sticking up or anything, because that'll definitely make it a lot easier. And then once you do get this on, I use a little bit of oil here so it'll slide in the rubber, and then I use a little bit of anti-seize to protect the threads. The last thing I'll mention about putting hoses together is definitely mark it here so you can see if you're twisting this in, if it's working its way out. And once I put this in, once I feel the thread start, I actually push up on this hose while I'm twisting it on down to make a good connection. I'm going to use a 90-degree coming off the return from the power steering box. I'm going to run it this way, and then I will mate it up using a T-fitting with the return line coming off the hydroboost, and then I'll run it to the cooler. I have the return line from the hydroboost cut with the fitting on. I've got the T here, and I've got the fitting on the T to go this way. Now I can easily measure the return line from the gearbox. I'll measure it right there, cut it, and I'll put this piece together. With the cooler bolted in place, I can go ahead and attach the return line, and now I'll go ahead and I'll tee it off here with the other return line. The last hose I need to make is returning back from the cooler into the filter here and then into the reservoir of the power steering pump. I like how I got this right here like this, nice and even, so I'm going to try and set this here and make it look as nice and neat as possible. Here's the final installation. You can see it hiding back there in front of the radiator a little bit. come up over the top. I ended up running this pressure hose in between the other ones, tighten it up a little bit. I used a couple zip ties here and a couple here. Everything's nice and neat. It's a lot of hoses, but it's neat and clean as possible. And I think it's really going to help a lot with the cooling and the autocross racing this year.